You could be larger than life, bigger than the world, living out the hopes and dreams of every boy and every girl. You could fly higher than the sky, shine brighter than the stars. You could have all you ever wanted, shoot the moon and reach for Mars. You know you could.
Hi, Chris. Welcome to Business Matters in our new space. You're the first one being interviewed here.
Cool space.
And basically, the first thing I'd like to share a bit with us is what happened with Happy Pots, what makes them so happy, I guess, and where did this come from, and how did the company become to where it is right now?
Sure. Thank you for having me, first of all. Very cool space. I guess we have to start this at the very beginning. So the idea came from something which, quite frankly, looking back, was a very significant moment, but in itself, for most people, it would have been rather insignificant. I mean, it was a school assignment. This was about 2 years ago now. I myself happened to be in the United States at the moment. I was on the last month of my 6-month stay in North Carolina, where I was studying business management there. And up until this point, I still had no idea what I was going to do with the rest of my life. For the previous few years, I was in BCom, which is the commerce course in the University of Malta, with pretty much no end in sight, as in I knew that the course would end eventually, but I didn't know what I was going to do after the fact. So the idea was to maybe start a job in marketing, or who knows, some management, but even that in itself is a very abstract field. So when the idea came about, it was kind of a eureka moment, which put us right here, right now. Day one of the first day we even spoke Happy Pot aloud was when George, my co-founder, the person I started this with, one of my best friends, he called me while he was in Gozo at the time. This was peak COVID, so everyone was trying to figure out what to do with their spare time, and we had a lot of free time, but both of us missed the fact that we had an assignment due in 15 minutes. So George gave me a call. He was like, bro, we have to submit an assignment title within the next 10 to 15 minutes. And now I was never really one to stress, so I was like, okay, we'll figure this out. But of course couldn't do something that was super advanced or well thought out in 15 minutes, naturally. So George started looking around the room, I started looking around my room, and George at the time was planting chilies at home. So
those COVID attempting to garden moments
exactly.
where
I'm sure a lot of people went through this.
I had tomatoes. That was
tomatoes.
my attempt.
Right. Did you manage to make anything with the tomato? No.
Very unfortunately,
So I think you must have needed a Happy Pot.
I should have, yes.
So if we try again now, maybe you'll
yes.
So yeah, George was planting his chilies, and he noticed that the pots themselves were rather, boring and bland and brown, which they are for the most part, brown or grey. These plastic pots we're so used to seeing. There's probably a couple lying around here that we don't even see. And once he mentioned the word pots, I was like, oh, interesting. This is something that's mundane, something that's typically used for practical reasons, but not necessarily something that's aesthetic or that's something that stands out and that people actually smile at when they see. And if I was to ever engage in any project, it would have to be something happy. So I'm very obsessed with the notion of creating something that makes people derive some form of positive emotion. So I figured if we're going to do something, whether it's product or service based, it has to be something happy. So with the 6 minutes we had left at the time, I was like, let's slap a smiley face on the pot and call it a Happy Pot. We submitted the assignment title, and then the rest was history. I mean, I got married to the idea very, very fast. Within the same day, I was already working on the designs for the brand, which back then was a shell of what it is now, of course, but it was still a very engaging project. I felt I was knee deep into it from the get-go. And once the design started coming in, we did a lot more research, of course. That's the step one to doing any kind of creative project or any project in general, really, is researching whether or not that project makes sense. So beyond slapping the smiley face on the pot and calling it a happy pot, we had to see if it made actual business sense, and of course if there was a market for it. So we started researching what is wrong with the current plant pot industry at the moment, globally, pretty much, not even in the context of Malta. We never really saw this as a Maltese, as a brand or a product that was strictly for the Maltese market. I mean, plant pots are everywhere. I would say Malta is one of the least places in the world that has, both by frequency, because there's of course less people, but also in general, I think there's a lot more plant savvy people out there rather than, here. And then we continued developing it. So when we researched, the first thing that came to mind was, how do we make these things? So far they're made with, unsustainable materials, so plastic for the most part. And we realized that there's a massive problem when it comes to the production of them and also the way that they are thrown away, which is exactly that. They're thrown away, quite frankly. They can't be recycled for the most part. So billions of them, and that with a B, they get, incinerated or end up in landfills or in our oceans every single year. So it's a problem that's been happening for ages, and unfortunately it will continue happening because it is the cheaper version, it's a cheaper alternative to what we're doing. And at the end of the day, large companies, they worry mostly about the bottom line. So if something is unsustainable but pays the bills, they're going to be producing that. We wanted to go a different route. Of course, it's a much harder route, but it's a more creative one, and one which we're very happy to be on, and will be on for the foreseeable future, which was to use a sustainable form of manufacturing. And that is 3D printing for us. So while there are other sustainable methods of manufacturing, I feel that 3D printing fused the sustainability element with the endless creativity. So realistically, we could make a pot out of anything. We could make anything out of anything, quite frankly. But I felt that was the method, that was the way in which we could produce something which was truly happy, because it was whatever we wanted it to be, whatever anyone could want it to be. Since then, we've gotten a lot more creative with the product itself. We have a lot of stuff in store that no one has seen, so I can only big it up here. But of course, very few people will be able to see it in person for now. It's been a massive learning experience so far. So of course, every day you learn something new, especially when I spent a lot of time working on it full time. Super extra mega full time, so there's literally not enough hours in the day. And the future is bright, and purely not just because of where the company is at right now and where I see it going, but also because where the world is going. I mean, the whole sustainable startup, the whole sustainable business in general is on the rise, because the generation that we form part of, which will be the leaders of tomorrow, now sees that if you're not sustainable, it being everything, is not sustainable, both as a person, both as a business, both as, the world in general. So I think there's a lot of room for improvement, both, internally and of course on a more macro level, I guess.
And clearly, I mean, just even from this little bit of conversation that we've had here, I mean, you can see that where your passion lies, I don't think is within pots, but obviously within the greater change that you can bring, and within business, and within where the potential of this might go. So obviously then my next question would have to be, you as a person, we've heard people who have described you as the perfect entrepreneur, who said that they would not invest in a business and they would not maybe invest in pots, but they will invest in you because they see your potential and they see all of the things that you can create when you really put your mind to it and you try. So what do you think about that? I mean, person first or product first?
Well, first of all, I'm far from the perfect entrepreneur. I don't think there is one, to be honest, because of course it's a very subjective thing.
It's a very broad term to say that someone
100%.
is perfect anything.
Yeah, entrepreneur in itself is a very broad term. I mean, rather than an entrepreneur in the traditional sense, I consider myself a creative first and foremost. I enjoy doing things and making things with my hands and seeing the product of my brain in a tangible product. So I guess my passions lie in, yes, sustainability, yes, business development, and achieving increasingly challenging business goals. But I'm really, really obsessed with product design and the act of creating something cool that people will use, but also derive some form of positive emotion from. So if it makes people happy, then I'll happily do it. As back to your question, if it's the person or the product, as cliche as it sounds, it's of course both. You can have an amazing product but the way in which you sell it or the people behind it might not be doing it justice, so that could potentially fail. Then again, you could have the best entrepreneur, the perfect entrepreneur, but the product isn't all that great. So you do need a mix of both. I would say that the Chris that started Happy Pot would not be able to have taken it this far. The Chris that sits here in front of you today has taken it this far because he is definitely not the Chris that was, a couple of years ago. There's constant improvement in this world. I mean, the deeper you get, the more you learn, the more you change. In some days, I don't even recognize the person I was a couple of years ago. And I think that the element of change is what drives great entrepreneurs and what drives great business acumen. Because at the end of the day, it's adaptability. The world will never be the same. Tomorrow is a whole completely different world from today. And if you're not able to adapt and change, then no matter how happy the product is, there's always a ceiling. So I do believe it's a mix of both. I was very, very lucky to be surrounded by some bright minds, some great mentors who along the way have shaped who I am today. And in that sense, I would say it's definitely more so the person than it is the product. So bottom line, person over product for sure. Persons over product, because it's not just you. At the end of the day, it's the people you surround yourself with, the people who believe in your project, so on and so forth.
And when you said you've changed, and obviously we hear this a lot when we're speaking to entrepreneurs. They say, the person who started this was left behind somewhere with the first product that we've created, and we've had to shape ourselves to become who we are now, because that's what the company needed, that's what I needed to become in order for this to grow bigger. Obviously, alongside you is the team. I'm guessing you were alone when you started this, and now you've got a team around you, and you went from being a solo person with your business partner to now leading a team. How has that affected you, and how has that changed in who you are? Because you're not just now a person who's happily designing pots and happy products. You need to also lead your team and make sure that everyone knows where you're going.
That's right. So in the beginning, it was just myself and my co-founder, George. George took a bit of a backseat because he was doing his master's at the time, which was super intensive. I personally underestimated how intensive the master's was, which is exactly why I chose not to do it. When I came to the choice of, do I proceed with the master's, do I proceed with Happy Pot, I realized that George was doing his utmost and struggling. Now, George got an A, his excellent thesis, and a super intelligent guy. But in order to get that A, in order to make the most of the opportunity, he had to give it his all. And I realized that I had to give it my all on the flip side. So, Happy Pot, you can't really do both. You can, I can't. So, I probably could have.
So I think it's about knowing yourself as well and knowing your strengths. Some people are really good at doing everything all at once. Some people really need to focus and hone in.
That's right. So, for the most part, like for the first, pretty much up until December, which was just a few months ago, it was just me doing everything. But I cannot say that the team was just myself, because again, I was surrounded by some very bright minds and people who I now consider my friends, who started as mentors, but I now consider as some of my best friends, who I would not have gotten here without, guaranteed. So I do consider them a very integral part of my team. Today we have one person who is working with us part-time and 2 interns, and we also outsource most of our stuff, for example, graphic design, videography, content creation, to young freelancers in Malta. I noticed that I do have the skill of bringing people together, but I'm still learning how to manage them effectively. I've managed to mitigate my limitations in that field by outsourcing. So rather than having to have all the people in the same spot and having to manage all of their tasks, which I would probably end up micromanaging at this point, because I'm so used to working by myself that I think it would be a bit of a struggle for me to, at this age, this current Chris, to be able to manage a fully fledged team.
So maybe Chris 2.0 will
maybe
be
Chris,
able to.
Maybe 7.0, maybe, who knows, No, but having now a team and people who are actually, they have this sense of ownership in it, fills me with pride, because I managed to, I guess my ambition, or my, some would call it delusion, or the drive that I have towards this project has dribbled down to the people who are now part of the team, who now understand the value or the potential value of the startup and of the company, and they're willing to put in the hours, whether it's on an internship basis or on a part-time basis or potentially even on a full-time basis, to actually make it happen. And I've had this conversation with Sean, who is our first ever employee. And as you'll know, startups aren't exactly the place you go if you're looking to make money, right? So if you're looking to make money, you go to a company that is willing to, to offer you enough money for your time. And the startup is more so a knowledge-based experience. So that's not to say I don't pay my employees, but I definitely pay them less than one of the big four would. But then if you're with a company that's in which you are just a number, because there are so many employees and there's just that one task that you have to do,
And
there are much less opportunities for
can
growth.
open up a conversation as well to
Exactly.
passion over money. I think it very much depends on what you want to do. I
Exactly.
mean, not to say that there's anything wrong with people who prefer, obviously, or are in a stage of their lives where they would like to make money because that is what is needed at the moment. But I think the startup experience is one that is unmatched in a big company, because I think the feeling of doing it all together and having a direct hand in the process, I think is...
No, that's exactly right. And you couldn't have said it any better. I mean, if you're in a startup environment and the founder limits you to doing one task and one task only, and judging you purely on the merits of that task, I feel that they are doing you a disservice. So when someone joins the team, I know that they have certain skills that the company would benefit the most from. But I'm also open to having someone come in, be a bit more flexible as to what they do, just learn, absorb, spend some time around us, shadow us, and figure out if they have any other strengths that they could possibly employ. So, for example, if I have a communication student that's working with me their primary role is, for example, a marketing strategist or a marketing executive. But it could come to light that on a meeting that I take that person with me, he turns out he has great sales skills. So potentially that could develop into a sales role, and that person could become a sales manager eventually. So it's really not about finding someone. And again, this I feel is unique to the startup experience, because once you get to the stage where you're employing people because of the fact that they are good at something, you expect them to do that thing to the best of their ability and deliver day in, day out. As a startup, I'm comfortable failing every single day. So I need to be comfortable with other people failing every single day, as long as they learn from it. So it's about failing fast, learning faster, and the more people fail, the more they learn. So I'm definitely willing to sacrifice excellence in order to achieve growth, both personally, but also as a team, and eventually even as a company.
And with the hiring process, given that obviously you're still a small team, are you looking for more Chris's, or are you looking for people who challenge you daily and who can bring different perspectives?
Yeah, we do not need another Chris, definitely. I think that would cause some friction for sure. Of course, I look for people who complement, not myself, but I look for people who complement the company and where we're at right now, where we want to go. So from the first conversation with a potential, team member, I can gauge why they're in it, why we're even having this conversation, what brought you to us, and where do you see yourself going with us rather than where you see the company going per se. I would love for people to bring what they have to the table, but also be in a position where they are able to learn and are willing to kind of take on new skills. So definitely not another Chris. Flexible people, adaptive people, creative people, of course, is a necessity, and people who share a passion for the project and for the mission, which is making the world a happier place.
Okay. And you mentioned before that you need to be comfortable failing.
Mm-hmm.
Would you be comfortable sharing with us a moment where you feel like, during the Happy Pod journey or during the whole journey where you failed completely? And
Sure. I think the one that stands out the most would be at the very, very beginning. So when we launched this, it was about 9 months into the preparation phase. So it came up with it at the beginning of 2022, the first time that we spoke the word Happy Pot aloud. And then we went through like 9 months of, I think it was 10 months actually, of like idea validation. We even went through the bootcamp of JA, which was very, very helpful. We even got to pitch for the first time ever. I'd never even pitched anything before, which was, really fun. And that gave us the skills that we needed to have enough faith in the project, but founder syndrome kicks in as soon as you're about to launch, because it's not even about arrogance or cockiness or false confidence or whatever, but it's mostly just you believe in the idea so much that
I think you'd be in the wrong business if you didn't believe in
As
your
a-
idea so much that you think
That's right.
everyone and their mums and their grandmas will love
Echo,
it.
echo,
You're
exactly.
doing
In fact,
the wrong
my,
thing.
My idea was I remember I bought 350 units worth of packaging. So I had 350 like soup containers, recyclable soup containers that we would put the pots in. And I was like, we're going to have a problem because we're going to sell out the first week. Like if they don't restock again, we're screwed because, of course that wasn't the case. I now understand that the message and the product itself was super clear in my mind, and internally it was clear to us. And we're in a circle, like, when you show it to your friends, your family, they're like, oh, it's such a cool project. But what we didn't consider was, first of all, how the market would react, because it's such a completely new product. Nothing else like it exists in Malta, quite frankly, in the world, to the extent that we've taken it in terms of customizability. So having to justify a price tag, which is 20 times the typical price of a normal plant pot, was a large hurdle for us. So people in Malta are used to buying plant pots for 50 cents, €1 from their supermarket or department stores or plant shops or whatever. And although I understand, and people overseas understand, and even local business people and investors understand the value in the product that we're selling, the average Joe found it hard to swallow that a plant pot worth €15, which isn't all that money, and people blow a lot of money on a lot of stupid stuff, but a plant pot that costs €15 as opposed to one that costs €1 was valuable enough. So that was a point of, it was a reality check in Filverta. I mean, I felt it was, do we actually have what it takes? Like, does this project have the capacity to go the long way? But I quickly realized that the point of a failure is for it to become the biggest lesson possible. So the bigger the failure, the bigger the lesson. And I don't even consider it a failure. It was more so a, how do I put this? I feel it was the point which gave us the most clarity. So one of the points which gave us the most clarity so far. It led us to go back to the drawing board and say, listen, the consumer market might not be the way to go, purely because people, especially the young demographic, which is students, might not have the disposable income to buy the product that we're selling. And the vision and the message might not be super clear yet. So what do? We decided to flip the script a bit, and we positioned Happy Pot as a corporate gift. So we went for a client that had predetermined budgets, that was actually more responsive to sustainability, that was more responsive to customizability. So we positioned Happy Pot as a meaningful gift that goes completely against the grain from the typical corporate gift that you're used to seeing. Mm-hmm. So the positioning then shifted to mugs and pens and hats are a thing of the past. What we offer is something which is a sustainable alternative, which actually plants trees for every pot that we sell. So there's also the sustainable element in it as well. That's the biggest element in it, for the Vereda. And it was something completely fresh. And that shifted things completely for us. So then we started getting orders of 100 pots, which was crazy back then, because we hadn't sold 100 pots in a month. So to get an order of 100 pots was mad.
Do you remember the first big order that you got?
I do remember the first big order. The first big order was a custom plant pot that we had made for a local leading real estate agency, and it was a plant pot in the shape of a house. So we had designed this custom made for them, and it had like the doors had the names of the agents, and it was a super cool gift. And that really took us, at that point it felt like it was a monumental move, because if someone was willing to pay X amount of money for something which we designed, which we sold, which we marketed as a sustainable gift, which is meaningful enough to be worth that price, then we're like, okay, then clearly there's a market for it. If there's a market for it locally, then there must be a bigger market for it internationally. So since then, we've doubled down on the B2B aspect here in Malta, and that has accounted for about 95% of our revenue so far. So last year, that was just about the number. But now we understand that we only went that direction because the local market, consumer market, was conservative. Then we did a lot more research. We even spent some time abroad. We even went to the different plant shops and gift shops, and we realized that things of a similar nature sell by the boatloads because the target demographic is completely different. So now we understand that Happy Pot is a consumer product with business applications.
Mm-hmm.
Because even when a company orders 500 pots from us, the end user is the consumer. It is the
Exactly.
person. It's going to be on their desk,
Mhm.
on their shelf. So we realize the value in people looking at it and enjoying it and smiling when they see it, which takes us back to the original plan, which we thought was a point of failure, which is this is to make people happy. So the point now is to give this and spread it to as many people as possible, both in Malta and overseas.
So, like, on a personal level, obviously you had a business strategy, you went into it, you were ready to go, and necessity and maybe, the actual market conditions made you change and pivot. So would you say that business strategy is worth it? Do you think startups should have a strategy, or do you think startups should be shaped by necessity and grow as you go, do it
Yeah.
as the market demands, maybe?
Yeah. Strategy is always essential. I mean, if you have a great product, but you don't know how to distribute it, you don't know how to market it, you don't know who you're marketing it to, selling it will be a lot more difficult because essentially it's like, shooting in the dark and hoping you'll hit the target. But there has to be an element of winging it, always, because there are going to be some moments which require that founder's mentality. If it was a traditional business person who would be faced with a challenge, which was rather risky, but very ingrained in the brand. So let's say you're at a fork in the road where you have to either really risk and have to learn a lot in order to possibly, on the off chance of succeeding, versus the safe route, which is to either A, quit, or not make that big step. The traditional businessman, who possibly has other endeavors, would go for the safe route, which is A, because he has a fallback plan, he has, maybe a 9 to 5 or another business that's, bringing in the money. But if you're a startup founder, or if you're a startup in general, that is banking the success on risky decisions, then you have to take that risky decision, and you have to do everything in your power to make sure that that risky decision becomes less risky. So there is an element of winging it. There has to be a proclivity to take risks, but then it's the strength and integrity of the startup founder to mitigate those risks as much as possible.
So then, even on a personal level, would you describe yourself as someone who enjoys taking risks? And because obviously that is the
Yeah.
vibe that I'm getting here,
yeah,
and
for sure.
I don't think you would be able to do this if you didn't wake up every day and were ready to take the risk. I mean,
Yeah.
if you had to give advice to someone out there who's looking to start their own thing
Mhm.
and is deciding on whether to start it as a side hustle and keep their 9 to 5, or whether to quit their 9 to 5 and focus completely on the startup.
The
what would-
age-old question. I think everything in moderation. So when I decided to focus full-time on Happy Pot, I was working at a sales job, and I realized that sales job was eating away at my time, but it was paying the bills. So although my mission was to develop Happy Pot as far and wide as possible, if I didn't have a place to stay, that would be very difficult, and rent has to be paid. Yeah, groceries have to get paid and cooked and cleaned and all that stuff. So you need to have something that sustains you. So I, as much as, go ham and do anything possible to make it work, also be a bit realistic and be like, listen, if this month or even the next 3 months I don't have this amount of money, I cannot sustain myself, let alone a business. And if you're a startup founder, especially a sole startup founder, then you need to oil the machine, which is operating the startup, which is yourself. So taking care of yourself isn't just physical fitness and mental clarity and meditation, but it's also actually having enough money in the bank to buy bread, which I mean, it sounds basic, but it has to happen. I do feel that taking that big of a risk and starting a startup with zero funds might be a bit foolish. Of course, it depends on how many people believe in you, who you have in your corner, but I would say rack up enough money, rack up a considerable amount of support before you take that leap. But definitely take that leap. I think eventually in order to truly make it, then you have to kind of give it your 100%.
Okay. And we were speaking about funding, and the word investment was mentioned. How has that journey been for you? Because obviously investors need to align with what you believe in. It's not just about the money, it's what they're bringing on board. And
Exactly.
how has this experience been for you?
So seeking out of investors is essential for startups. I mean, it's not just a matter of having someone to believe in you, but of course it's, as you said, the investment itself, the capital. I mean, to make some big steps, you need to have some deep pockets, probably deeper than most startups have, especially if you're looking for, exponential growth. Then you need to have an exponential increase in the amount of money that you have. So investment is always up for grabs. But I do now believe that the longer you wait and the more of an informed decision you make when it comes to seeking investors and choosing the right investor, probably the better off you will be. Because I remember the very, very first few months that we had launched, I think it was even before we had actually launched, we were in the process of bringing on board an investor, bringing on board a pair of investors. It was an investing pair. And it would have been something abysmal. Like it was, I think, like 7,000 euros for like 20% of the business, which back then, 7,000 euros was more money than both of us had combined. But 20% of the business today is worth a whole lot more than that. And in 10 years, will be worth a whole lot more than that. So luckily, that process dragged on for a few months. And in the process of those few months, I became a bit skeptical as to, okay, so in the face of a very clear plan on our end, we see where this is going. We see where it could potentially lead. Am I willing to give up 20% of my business, a quarter of my business, for a measly 7,000 euros, which we could potentially make in one order, which we did make in one order? So then I went back to the drawing board. I spoke, of course, with my co-founder. I spoke with my mentor at the time. And we realized that we would have much rather stuck through a couple more months of not knowing what to do and trying to grind it out than go for that initial investment. And luckily, we, of course, stopped that there. Then we had launched. The launch wasn't as, fantabulous as we would have liked. And a few months later, once we had gone back to the drawing board, got a decent foot into the B2B sphere, we had racked up, I believe at the time it was, I think, 400 pots sold. This was in March of 2022. No, 2023, as that. We got approached, I think might have been Mold Enterprise who approached us to apply for Shark Tank.
Okay.
And that was a really cool experience. That actually that was the first legit pitch that we'd ever done. So I remember we were, I think, among the last people to apply. So that gave us about 2 weeks to prepare the pitch, to prepare the products that we were going to have on stage. And I remember it was the day before we were still printing the last stuff that we had to have as props. And most startup founders will understand that it's almost always, or at least in our case, that's the way it was. It's always down to the wire, So I remember myself and George pitching for hours on end the day before. I think we pitched it at least 100 times. I remember. Like I have nightmares of, "Hi sharks, I'm Chris." We said that, I swear, more than 200 times over George's kitchen table. And when the time came to it, the pitch went excellent. So we were very well prepared. We already had an idea in mind of what we wanted to get out of the investment, out of the activity in itself. And we walked away with 4 offers, which was, excellent, because you're in there hoping for one person to kind of get a snag on the line, and then suddenly you have 4 of Malta's, brightest business minds to want to work with you. So that was in itself very, very validating to know that someone else believes in your idea.
And I think as well, I mean, people act like saying, it was an ego boost is a bad thing, but I think in business, sometimes you need that ego boost. I mean, these people who are so successful and they're fighting with each other over who gets to invest with you. So I think
exactly. No, that definitely helped the ego. Of course, it's always good to stay grounded, and at the end of the day, we had to go with just the one investor, which we did. We shook hands. Unfortunately, the investment didn't go the way we had planned because, again, it dragged on for quite a few months. So I feel this is kind of a typical situation with investors. Foolishly, I thought once you shake hands, you'll have X amount of money in your back pocket the next day, which of course isn't the case. There's a lot of due diligence that goes in the way. not even just that, but these investors are very busy people as well. So the investor that we had gone with, I believe, had investments in like 60 plus companies. So a lot of stuff on their plate. That said, after the show had aired, we had went from like 400 pots sold to 1,200 pots sold in a matter of a few weeks, or let's say a couple of months. So I was like, okay, this could potentially be something. I can see why the investor wanted to invest in us. I can see why they all wanted to have some skin in the game. But then once it dragged on for a few months, I was like, okay, in the face of success, in the face of considerable growth, considering the market, considering that we had not spent a cent on marketing so far, this was purely based off the hump that Shark Tank gave us, which, very grateful for. The publicity was excellent. But we realized that even in the face of this considerable growth, there wasn't effective communication, and I feel the priorities wasn't in line with what the investor had in mind and what they could offer. So what had happened was, when we went to Shark Tank, the initial idea was to get, yes, the money, because the money helps, but also to get the mentorship. So if you give two 23-year-olds 135,000 euros, and
I feel like this is the start of a very bad movie. Two 23-year-olds with a lot of money and no idea what to do with them.
Exactly, it does sound like a terrible movie. But the moment that two relatively newcomers to the game, not relatively, super fresh legs in the game, have X amount of money in their hands and no idea how to spend it, that money is going to be a very, very short-term solution, because you'd end up burning through that money on stuff that you think makes sense, but what you think is probably not in line with what is actually true. So we realized that the mentorship was even more valuable than the money, and because the investor could not, and rightfully so, because of course they were rather busy, could not invest the mentorship hours and the actual time and effort into it, we said we should go our separate ways. Of course, we ended things very amicably, and they put in an order as well, so that went super well. But no, now we retain all of the company, except for a 5% shareholding with our manufacturer, which we're very, very happy with. But it couldn't have worked out any better, Shark Tank, in a sense, because we got the publicity, and we managed to retain all of the company because of what transpired with the investor. But it was a massive lesson as well, because you realize your worth at that point. It was as validating as having 4 sharks on the line, to be able to sit down with the investor, stand your ground, and say, as much as we would love the money, we would also love the mentorship. And because we do not believe that we can, get that, and because we believe that that is so important, we cannot afford to give away a quarter of the company for any amount of money, because the mentorship is so valuable that then we had to seek it out ourselves. So we surrounded ourselves with mentors who, after the fact, helped us out for free, knowledge and experience, and being able to take us under their wing and teach us the ins and outs of business. These people are still, in our midst to this very day, and I'm very lucky to call them my friends now.
And I think for startup founders, I think this is a very important lesson, because obviously when you're in that business and when you're in the situation, it's essential. Money is essential, and you would do anything to get it. I mean, but sometimes it's important to take a step back as well and realize that, okay, money is the end goal, but maybe the path that you're on right now will distract more from the end goal than it will help in the long term. Because if you're giving someone an amount in the company, obviously they should have as much passion and as much skin in the game as you do, because obviously this is now not just your company, it's also their company. It becomes, it takes a village.
Yep. And when you bring on a shareholder, when you bring on an investor, then suddenly your interests shift from taking the brand as far as possible and making it as cool as possible and as appealing to your market, to pleasing the shareholders. And nowadays, most companies, from startups who have got an investment to larger companies, their main interest is shareholder satisfaction. Because if the shareholders aren't interested, that all they're worried about is return on investment. As passionate as they are, it's an investment. That's the game. So I feel, having retained the company to ourselves and having to go back to the drawing board, say, listen, we were thinking that we would have a large amount of money, which now we will not. So what do we do? That question, that what do we do, put our backs against the wall and kind of made us what we are today. Because if we hadn't been faced with that struggle, if we hadn't been faced with that challenge, then I doubt that we would have worked so hard to actually make it so far.
And one final question to wrap this all up.
Sure.
Obviously, you're quite young, you've started this company, you've been successful. What advice would you give to young people out there who are looking to start their own business and maybe they're a bit lost on how to start?
That's a very loaded question. I think it's just a matter of finding the right idea, and of course that's where it starts. And the right idea can mean a lot of things. It can mean the right idea to you, it can mean the right idea to your market. Timing is also a very, very important thing. The resources which you have available to allocate towards that idea, both in terms of money and time. All of these considerations are important, but at the end of the day, it has to be something you're passionate about. So if you have all the money in the world, but what you're doing is something that doesn't really drive you forward, then there's a ceiling to how high you can go, because you're not truly in it. What I would say to the aspiring startup founder is find a purpose, find a mission, find a value that you really, really gravitate towards, and work on that. Something that I'm struggling with at the moment, not struggling with, but something that is kind of a fork in the road right now is at this stage of the startup where there are a few loose ends, where there are some things which definitely could be improved. Like, for example, the financial aspect I absolutely hate. Anything related to numbers I hate. But I'm very good at the creative stuff, so product development.
What to say, I think it's the curse of the creatives.
It is truly that. So one example of the fork in the road is, do I focus on my strengths? Do I play at my strengths and try to create as much as possible and achieve what we initially set out to achieve, to create a happy product that people would enjoy seeing? Or do I focus on my weaknesses to improve them and try to become a jack of all trades? I have decided to focus on my strengths and outsource the rest, because I truly believe that you cannot do everything by yourself. Like, up until December, I was doing everything by myself. As soon as I had to go abroad for a few weeks and I left George and a member of our team to kind of take care of what had to be taken care of, because I hadn't developed the right systems in place, things kind of collapsed.
And I think that's also, you need to sometimes take a step back and say,
Yeah.
if, as morbid as it sounds, I get hit by a car tomorrow,
Yeah,
will my
yeah.
business get hit by a car with me,
Exactly,
or can it keep on running?
Exactly. It has to be able to sustain itself, and you can only do that if you really understand what you're good at. Focus all your efforts on that. Again, this is purely my opinion on it. Focus all your efforts on that and figure out a way to assemble the Avengers to kind of make it all make sense. That might be a bit more advanced than the actual initial stage, because this is post idea validation, post go to market plan and everything. From the very, very get-go, passion is a non-negotiable. It has to be something that you're passionate about, and in my humble opinion, I think it has to be something that in some capacity can change the world. I think if it's a mission grounded in actual sustainability, not just eco-friendliness, but a sustainable future, I think, one, it probably makes more business sense, and two, people will find it easier to subscribe to it and actually gravitate towards it. So I think it's very purpose-driven and values and passion-driven and so on. So find an idea you like, make it your mission, stick to it, maybe not quit your job the first day, but yeah, I think there's a lot of information out there nowadays. Even if you read up on previous startup founders, there's a lot to take in from there. I mean, I'm sure you know.
And I know I said that was my last question, but it's something that came up, and I feel like I have to ask you, because I enjoy asking startup founders that I've met this question just to see their take on it. So if I had to say that business sense would take on the analogy of a boat, do you say that you enjoy building the boat more, or do you think that you enjoy sailing the boat more?
Oh. Do I enjoy building the boat more or sailing the boat more? Well, I get seasick, so I wouldn't really be on the boat. Let's say it's a car.
Let's
right?
say it's a car, yes.
Well, if you don't build the car, you can't really drive it. I do think that you have to be able to lay the foundations, and you have to be able to picture where those foundations will lead you. But yeah, like I said, if you don't have that thing, then you can't really sail it or drive it or cycle it. So I would say a healthy mix of both. I do think that there is value in the end goal, but you cannot just be determined by the end goal. I mean, as cliche as it sounds, we've heard this in so many rom-coms and movies, but it's all about the journey, and it really is about the journey. And the journey has made me who I am today, and I'm sure that the car that I'll drive or the boat that I'll sail in the coming years is purely determined by the steps that we take throughout this journey. So, final answer.
So thank you so much for your time. It was
Thank
a very
you.
interesting discussion. I think we got a lot out of that, even besides the business and in general, obviously, how this has developed. And we'd love to have you again. So
Cool.
for sure, we'll
Maybe
do this again.
Yeah, we'll do in a year's time.
Yes.
We'll see how things transpire.
We'll do the whole Billie Eilish thing where we ask you the
Ooh,
same
that's that,
question in
that's
a
that,
year
that's that.
and see how you've
Yeah,
changed.
we could do that. Cool, nice,
Thank you very much.
lovely stuff.